All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here are doing a long-awaited prediction for the game. Ohio State traveling to Ann Arbor, 12 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. The line's all over the place right now. -5 seems to be the consensus in favor of the Wolverines. Over under 47.5. Nick, this has been an interesting last couple of weeks for the Michigan program. With the whole sign stealing. Not just allegations, but a lot of proof. And, it's even resulted in Jim Harbaugh's 3-game suspension. So he'll not be on the sideline for this game. The bashing on social media over these two fan bases the last couple weeks has been outrageous. You have the Michigan football team themselves, really playing the victim card. This extra degree here of element for this football game, Nick's really amped it up. Is this a game of the century type feel for you?
This is certainly a game of the century type feel. I don't think the college football playoff poll or voters and committee will make it a 1-2 matchup, which I think would add to that feel. Of course, these two teams played 1 versus 2 game of the century type game in 2006, where at the time Ohio State was able to win that game, and they were able to push on towards competing for a national championship. They had a great quarterback in Troy Smith, who won the Heisman. Obviously, that was a great matchup, but it went down to the wire that year. And this is a game that's looking similar to that one in terms of absolutely importance. This game has been very important the last 2 years, right? The winner has gone on to win the Big Ten and go to the playoff. Although Ohio State snuck their way in last year, this game has equally just as important. I think, if the winner of this game is almost all but assured a spot in the playoff, the loser is basically eliminated at this point, barring a bunch of other results that could potentially happen at the time of recording this. This is a huge matchup. It's got game of the century feel for sure. This is a big one.
Looking at the Ohio State offense, Kyle McCord's really settled in after a tough start to the year. Of course, he had to go to Notre Dame and, pick up a tough, hard-fought road to victory there. He's having a pretty good season, though, as we went on. He had another 200-plus and 2 touchdowns against Minnesota. On the year, he's pushing 3,000 yards, 22 passing touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. Obviously, 2 of those coming against Wisconsin, where he didn't make the best of decisions. But overall, McCord's been completing the ball at a nice rate. 66% completion rating. His, receiving core, of course, is phenomenal. Marvin Harrison Jr., I think he scored in, 7 straight games now. He's really trying to continue to make a push for his Heisman candidacy. Up to 13 scores now, well over 1,000 receiving yards. Cade Stover is going to have to be big here on the road as a tight end. Nice safety blanket for him. Been very reliable for McCord. Emeka Egbuka, he's really struggled with health this year, but this is a guy that can come out there and make an impact. Carnell Tate, Julian Fleming, these guys don't have great production, over 200 yards each, but this is still, all 5 stars I just read off outside of maybe Stover. They can certainly make a big impact going against the Michigan, secondary. They didn't look the best against Maryland this Saturday, Nick. How do you feel about McCord going on the road once again with this talented bunch of receivers he seems to be much more in sync with?
Certainly a tough task heading on the road, obviously, Ann Arbor. These fans have taken on, like you said, the victim role. They're going to be very loud. It's going to be a tough atmosphere to play, but McCord has proven this season they can handle a tough atmosphere. He looked great against Notre Dame, in my opinion. I think he looked very comfortable in the pocket in that game. Obviously led the team on that late drive. Maybe made a throw or two that was a little questionable in that last drive, but they got the job done in that drive, and they went on to beat Notre Dame on the road in South Bend, and certainly has an opportunity to put the kind of pressure on his back. McCord's having a good season, a fantastic season, 2,600 yards passing, nearly 2,700 yards, 20 touchdowns, 4 picks from McCord. Looks comfortable in the pocket. Obviously, he has some fantastic weapons to throw to. Marvin Harrison Jr., who has been battling injuries, but still is a phenomenal receiver, 1,000 yards receiving, 12 scores for him. Other guys throughout his receiving room are fantastic. Harrison Jr. had another touchdown today, so I believe that's 13 now. Cade Stover, fantastic physical tight end. Emeka Egbuka, who was the top receiving target against Minnesota with 83 yards on 5 grabs, is a very fantastic receiver. The running back room looks to be getting in better shape. They're able to pick up better ground game and slowly get more comfortable after they struggled to run the ball earlier in the season. I'm happy with how this offense has progressed. It's a very dynamite offense. They're scoring a ton of points still. They scored a ton of points over the past couple weeks, 38 against Michigan State, 37 against Minnesota, 35 against Rutgers. This offense can hit you very quickly and punch you in the jaw.
Yeah, I think Brian Hartland's been prepping for this game for quite a long time. They certainly haven't generated as much space as we're accustomed to seeing on these routes this season, or as many big plays, but they're still very good when it comes to finding that free space, being able to convert and get downfield. Travion Henderson, of course, he ripped off a 60-plus yard touchdown against Notre Dame. That ended up being big, big time difference maker there. He ended up missing the next 3 games, Nick, but he ended up returning here over this last month, 4 games in a row now. He's just been very splendid. That includes 3 100-yard games, total of 5 touchdowns rushing as well. He's really added extra degree here to this rushing game. Had about 10 yards per carry against Minnesota. They really needed this too. They were struggling to run the football. Of course, Mayan Williams, he's out for the year. He hasn't played in weeks. Chip Traino's been the number 2. He's got about 300 plus yards and a couple of scores this season. Xavier Johnson, I think you'll see him a good bit. He's obviously a bit of a hybrid player for this Buckeyes offense. But Henderson, his speed, his ability to be a physical runner has really changed this offense, who, again, struggled in short yardage and overall was not very good at running the football this season. I mean, the numbers aren't all that great compared to years past, about 145 yards per game on the ground. But Henderson here, Nick, he's really added some nice balance, much needed balance to the Buckeyes offense to help out this young quarterback.
As I had just previously said, the running back game had not been fantastic for Ohio State this year, which I think is something that's been disappointing for Brian Hartline's offense on the field. But Henderson's been really coming together the last couple of weeks. Like you said, dominated against Minnesota, looking good in that game for him. 146, 2 scores, 9.7 yards per carry, and a 75-yard long for the day. Very good numbers out of him. If they can get this offensive running game really working, I think it's a big key to success for Ohio State, which is why I think they have a good opportunity to win this game on the road. They're getting better on the ground, right? The 145 is an improvement. The number you were hoping you would be closer to 200 this year, and it really is a little disappointing, I guess, you're an Ohio State fan, to be under 150, but it's getting better as the weeks go on. Henderson's really performing. I think he's the key to success in beating Michigan here. Is can they find a dominant run game on the ground and get those good holes through the strong offensive line and have Henderson have a good day?
Yeah, he's also, over 200 yards receiving this year. About half of that coming over here the last couple of games. So he's certainly going to get a lot of touches in this one. And the offensive line, coming into the year, I picked this team to win the national championship. But we both admittedly said this offensive line is going to be a bit of an issue. And that's why they struggle with short yardage. And that's, again, why they're not all that great in terms of running the football. Josh Simmons, he's been, solid at left tackle. It's mainly been about the guys on the interior, though, Matthew Jones and Donovan Jackson at guard. They're going to have to continue to be stout. Carson Hinsman at center. Really just a big liability for him. I think Josh Fryer over right tackle. He's probably having the best year of all these guys, even though he has allowed a couple of sacks. He was at 4 entering the game against Minnesota. Pass protection's really been good, though, I'd say, from this offensive line. Again, the short yardage and the run blocking isn't the most stout, and that could be a massive problem here as they try to make a postseason run, and it's going to start in Ann Arbor, Nick. These tackles, though, they'll have to be, they'll have to continue to be great in the interior, facing a phenomenal defensive line. Hinsman at center, he's got to be very good.
They certainly have to be good. This offensive line has to be physical. I said there was some question marks. They were replacing some pieces. I thought they had some good players. Broderick Jones, I was hoping that he would have a great season. I'm a little disappointed, but I've seen him improve over the last couple of weeks. This is a good physical offensive line. They can get the blocking lanes and shut down this Michigan defensive line that's been a very good unit this year and give Henderson the room to run. I think they can have a great success in offense as long as they can protect Kyle McCord, which they've been able to do all year, right? The pass protection has been fantastic. It's just making sure those running lanes are open for their star running back, Travion Henderson.
Now, looking at the Michigan offense, before the Penn State game, everyone talked about how good this offense has been. It's been more of a pass-first unit. The running game certainly has been very productive as well. There's a lot of things to dissect here, though. J.J. McCarthy's going to have another stellar effort. Last year, I picked Michigan to win this game in Columbus because of the run game. And it's really what McCarthy was able to do with some big plays downfield for, the early part that gave them a nice lead. He's coming off, some interesting contests, though. He had a pretty bad game against Maryland. He had an end zone interception right before the half. He played earlier. He forced it in the coverage. Late in the game, he missed a wide open post route when he really could have put this game on ice. Against Penn State, they completely shut down the passing attack. It wasn't really anything that McCarthy was doing, but I think that's just, the lack of chemistry is certainly going to be an issue here. He only completed 7 of 8 passes for 60 yards, didn't throw a single one in the second half. And that's because they were getting exposed up front, Nick, with the tackles. We'll talk extensively about them here in a second. Roman Wilson exited that game against Maryland with a hard hit. He should be good to go. We'll see how the week goes. One grab for 23 yards. He's a guy that, they find in the end zone a lot. Double-figure touchdowns on the season. He's also very good in short area. A guy they look to at the sticks. 600 yards, 10 scores on the season. Well over 16.5 yards per reception. Cornelius Johnson had a big game last year in this contest. He's been a little bit more quieter, but he's still a physical specimen that can win downfield. Colston Loveland, I love his abilities at tight end as a route runner. He's got 4 touchdowns as well. So they got a couple guys they're going to look for at the sticks here. This receiving game, though, Nick, it's not deep one bit. We talked about it before coming into the year, and I think it's actually been a little bit worse in terms of wide receiver production than even I imagined, because I figured they would spread it out a little bit more.
I think this is an interesting offense you look at. I'm a little concerned about J.J. McCarthy coming into this game. Didn't throw the ball at all in the second half against Penn State and didn't have a great day this past game against Maryland. 12 of 23, 141, one interception, 0 touchdowns, 6.1 yards per attempt. Not great numbers in my opinion, very poor numbers if you look at McCarthy. He didn't throw the ball in the second half, so I'm a little worried about McCarthy. He needs to be the guy to star in this game, which if you look at these stats, if you're a Michigan fan, I would be a little concerned. Of course, the run game is going to be a big factor to this. They were talking about it at a broadcast I was watching earlier, where they highlighted how Jim Knowles did not forget all over them last year and had that big game-sealing run at the end of the game, that Knowles has worked on his defense to try and change this and prevent them from getting beat downfield. I think that's a very important thing to notice, that this is a very incredibly talented running back room with 2 star backs that they can run the ball back and forth with Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum. They both are very talented backs. Ohio State has to find a way to stop them. Corum had 94 yards on the ground against Maryland, 2 scores. Edwards had 40 yards in his own right. So this is a very talented offensive unit that can run the ball a whole lot. I mean, you look at the stats, 171 on the ground is really solid, about 400 yards per game total offense. McCarthy's going to have to step up. He has some issues. Roman Wilson potentially is questionable for Saturday, one of his better wide receivers. Overall, the wide receiving room in Michigan is lacking that pure talent that you see down in Columbus. They have incredibly talented wide receivers. These guys, though, are solid. They catch the ball. I'm a little concerned, though, about McCarthy, and I'm concerned if the run game can keep up. If the run game struggles and you have to make McCarthy make plays, I think the secondary can certainly make him make mistakes and cause Michigan to find themselves in serious trouble.
Yeah, Michigan fans were not happy with me when I said the running game has not been very efficient before the Penn State game, and they certainly answered the call that day. 227 on 46 attempts, about 5 yards per carry. Coming into that, though, it was less than 4 yards per attempt, and you had that against Maryland as well, where they had another 45 carries for only $150. And they're certainly able to churn things out on the ground. Didn't have a single run over 15 yards. The explosiveness of this passing attack, or the rushing attack, rather, you saw it against Penn State a little bit, but that was really, Manny Diaz being overcommittal and really aggressive, and they kind of struggled with those, 6-7 lineman sets that they were putting out there against the Nittany line, strong front. And, again, the efficiency hasn't been as strong. Blake Corum, though, he's still great. When they get into the red zone, that's all they do is pound the rock. They don't get cute. They don't need to. 20 rushing touchdowns this year. I think all but 1 or 2 have come inside the 5-yard line. He's averaging over 5 yards per attempt. He's pushing 900 yards this season. Donovan Edwards hasn't had as much usage. He's around 300 yards this year, 3 touchdowns. Hasn't been much of an efficient runner for the Wolverines. The interior of this offensive line is phenomenal, Nick, and that's why they're so good at running the football. The production this year, still very good. Another 3 rushing touchdowns, against Maryland, puts them over 30 on the season. But overall, I think the yards and the efficiency hasn't been as good as I thought. 171 rushing yards this year, and they're pushing about 4.7 yards per attempt. A little bit lower in that number after this game here. And that's still great, right? But they've really beat up on some weak opponents, and over the last month, it hasn't exactly been impressive other than Penn State, where they just ran it on every single play.
Right, this is a unit that has beat up on a lot of opponents. They do have impressive numbers of 30 touchdowns. The archery game's a little disappointing. I think the blueprint you saw against Penn State is what they're going to try and do. That's like their goal for this offense is, can they run a similar blueprint they did against Penn State, where they really didn't have to do anything in terms of passing the ball. They were able to run the ball and chew down that Penn State team. But that Penn State defensive line, the pass rush did expose a little bit of weakness on this offensive line. And I think this is a very talented Ohio State defensive line that we saw them get after some of the better quarterbacks they played throughout this season. They were able to get after a common opponent in Penn State and Drew Aller and make him uncomfortable. So this is certainly an opportunity for Ohio State to get good pressure on Michigan, make McCarthy uncomfortable, make him make mistakes.
Yeah, the interior of this offensive line is phenomenal. Drake Nugent at center. The Stanford transfer has been great. Zach Zinter, Trevor Keegan, I like what they have there. But these tackles really struggled. Carson Barnhart was awful against Penn State. I think he had a 0 PFF grade in that one. And then, Ladarius Henderson, whenever he's played at left tackle, hasn't been the strongest. I think he's probably been their second worst pass protector. Trenty Jones, he's been solid in his limited reps. He's a very capable player. Of course, Miles Hinton, he ended up going down. We'll see what his status is going to be for this upcoming game. But I'm pretty concerned with these tackles, Nick, as Penn State, again, they really exposed them. They shut down the passing game for a reason, because they were having major troubles in that first half. Carson Barnhart himself, he really understands that. Struggled again against Maryland. This guy is just a massive liability, Nick, facing another talented pass rush. Got to be able to run the football. If you're in these long down and distance situations, a fumble, a strip sack of that nature, it's coming.
Certainly you have to be able to run the ball. And like you said, I'm concerned with some of the play I've seen from this offensive line. They have to be able to get this right against a super talented pass rush in Ohio State. If you make a mistake like that, the Buckeyes are going to jump all over you with this dynamite offense. It could be certainly pose huge problems for Michigan if they make mistakes early on, fumble the ball like you said, and get uncomfortable in the backfield.
Yeah, I expect them to run the ball with some efficiency. I think they'll be a little bit more creative to try and shy away from that. But the Michigan offense right now is not really beaten to a great tune coming into this Ohio State game. McCarthy, though, and his running backs and his offensive line, these guys are all capable of coming out here and stealing the show. Looking at the Ohio State defense that's going to try and match up with them. Like you said, Jim Knowles, he's been well aware of, what happened last year where they got stuck in man coverage and Donovan Edwards really exposed them to really seal the deal. And I picked Michigan to win last year in this game because I really thought that Ohio State was soft. And for the most part of that game, they actually stood up very well against the run, if you recall in that game, late in the third quarter is really when they started churning it out. So for the most part, they stood up well. And I think Ohio State, they've, progressed very well on this side of the ball. Very good players like Jack Sawyer off the edge. He hasn't been exactly a productive pass rusher. He's been a really good run defender, though. Tyleik Williams, Ty Hamilton on the interior. These guys are great. Michael Hall likely probably not going to be playing in this contest, so that certainly isn't great for them. And then, of course, JT Tuimoloau, he's looking to absolutely eat up that matchup with Barnhart. They've been phenomenal against the run this year, Nick. They've not cracked one bit other than that Rutgers game where they were just pretty bad, letting them just run right downhill at them. Overall this year, 108 yards per game allowed on the ground. And, that was just a soft day, it seemed, from the Buckeyes going on the road to Piscataway, gave up 239 to Rutgers. Other than that, though, they've been really good. That third quarter against Notre Dame wasn't the greatest in terms of stuffing the run. Other than that, though, I can't think of many examples where they struggled. They were complete dynamite against Penn State. But they can't have a repeat of what happened against the Scarlet Knights, Nick, where, again, they just ran right downhill at them.
They certainly cannot have a repeat. The Scarlet Knights are able to get the job done and run on them. This is a very talented defense that Jim Knowles has cooking 9.2 points per game. I feel like people are not really talking about that number. That is a really impressive number. Right, the rush yards per game is at 108, which is a little bit higher than Michigan. Of course, it's a little bit inflated by the game against Rutgers. I think this is a very solid unit, 252 yards per game of total defense given up. This is a very physical unit that has some seriously nice tacklers. These guys are physical. They had some guys rest this weekend to get them fully healthy, trying to get them back into full capability. It's a very talented defensive line that has some nice physical pieces on the front. JT Tuimoloau, Tommy Eichenberg, who was rested and is coming back for this game most likely, and going to be a talented, hard-hitting player to have. I like this defense. This run defense is very stellar, and this is the chance here. You got to win this battle, right? Michigan's going to want to run the ball. Can this Ohio State defense win the battle on the ground? If they do so, they're going to have a ton of success in this game.
Sawyer coming off a 3.5 tackle for loss game against Minnesota. He's really peaking at the right time. Tyleik Williams, he's probably been their best defender up front, but this is a really good defensive line. I talked about it coming into the year, how much I liked it. Hall being down certainly doesn't help. I'm not all that worried. Like you said, Eichenberg rested this past game. Cody Simon got the start. Steele Chambers, I think he's really grown this year. I think it's his third year now after switching over. So these linebackers, though, they have to be very stout in this contest. They got to be disciplined. They got to be able to showcase its physicality. If they don't, the last 2 years they've been just awful really against the run. So they are facing a similar style than what they did against Rutgers. Failed the test there. I think they'll certainly be much better here. I don't expect Jim Knowles to get carried away, even if they're facing 6 or 7 linemen. I think they're certainly going to be, in an appropriate area in terms of aggressiveness. They won't overcommit. I think they'll be ready for that challenge. What are your thoughts on this front seven, Nick? Going against, again, a very physical downhill rushing attack by Michigan.
I think this is a very good front seven. I think they have a great opportunity here to be the one to set the pace and get the stops on the ground. If they can make J.J. McCarthy uncomfortable and force him to throw where he's looked weak the past 2 weeks, Ohio State will have a ton of success. Having Eichenberg at full health, I think resting him today against Minnesota was a great decision. If he's at full health, he's a very physical guy who can get and track running backs perfectly. I like what they have on the front defensive line of this unit. This 4-2-5 they run is a very solid unit. The 4 guys on the defensive line are all physical, good players, and your 2 linebackers are very talented. I like what I'm seeing out of this defense. They're getting better throughout the season, and they're very good against the run. The middle has to be very physically strong, which is something I think they can do. I like what this front part of this unit is going to be able to do.
Yeah, Ohio State's secondary, only 7 plays of 30-plus passing allowed through the air. I mean, the Buckeyes have been very stout in the secondary. Josh Proctor is unlikely to return for this game. Sonny Styles, though, former 5-star, he's ready to step into that role. He's played a lot this year. Denzel Burke's been good on the outside. Jermaine Matthews in his appearances, he's been a great defender for this football team. Davis and Igba's son as well. These corners are going to be tasked with, just trying to stay in front of the markers, not get beat deep. The talent for Michigan is not all that great on the outside, but you still got to be attentive. Like last year, they still got gashed by the same exact guys. Jordan Hancock in the slot, probably going to get some Colston and Loveland matchups. Probably Sonny Styles will, though, with his size. very good secondary overall for Ohio State, Nick. One thing I do worry about is just eye discipline, and considering they're going to have to come up to make plays against the run, right? Maryland had some success doing that, and Michigan wasn't able to expose them in terms of play action all that much. But that's something that's certainly a worrisome factor on a week-to-week basis. I think Noel's going to preach that all week long to his secondaries. If you're getting involved in the run, you got to be disciplined because you can't get beat by that play action, and if you do, you better get home.
They certainly cannot get beat by the play action. They have to be focused on that and make sure they do not make mistakes. The play action could certainly kill you. We saw it happen last year. Secondary, they look totally out of place at certain points. I think the secondary is going to be in for a big game. I like these guys. They're very big, physical, hard-hitting players who get interceptions. They're good, solid in the backfield. They looked good against Notre Dame. Looked good against Penn State. They got to be able to make sure the run doesn't beat them. They have to be able to make sure that they're careful, and like you said, be careful against the run. Don't get burned. Jim Knowles is going to be preaching that all week in practice. They know what happened last year. They have the tape on it. They're going to make sure they don't make mistakes like that from last year.
Yeah, Latham Ransom, a guy who really struggled last year in coverage. He's doing a lot better this season. Certainly kind of a coming out party for him. Overall, this is an Ohio State defense. It's much better than a lot of people anticipated. I thought it'd be a strong unit, but both of these defenses are allowing less than 10 points per game. Final thoughts on this side of the ball, Nick, because the last 2 years it's been awful. They've given up 40-plus points each time. Jim Knowles, I know he's itching to get some revenge here on this one on the road. And like we said, some of the, liabilities at the tackle position really opens the door for them to really do some damage. And they have a lot of confidence in these guys. They're playing a lot of man against Penn State, and they didn't fold one bit. Played with plenty of IQ. They trust each other. I think the confidence and communication is at an all-time high.
Penn State fans certainly have not forgotten what has happened, or not Penn State, Ohio State fans, I'm sorry, have forgotten what has happened over the past couple of years with this defense getting absolutely beat against Michigan, giving up so many points. Jim Knowles knows that. He's going to preach that all week. I expect this defense to have a fantastic game. I think they're a great unit, and this is the year that they're going to have a chance to shut down Michigan. Michigan looks weak passing the ball as of late. They're going to rely on the run. If this Ohio State team can stuff the run, they have a great chance to win this ball game.
Looking at the Wolverines' defense, 9 points per game allowed. Less than 235 yards per contest. They've been dynamic against the run. Same thing against Maryland, only giving up 15. This is a side of the ball that's incredibly deep, especially on the defensive line. You have plenty of guys that can really get after it. Starts with guys like Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, Braden McGregor. Some very good players, all very productive as well. Jalen Harrell off the edge, Josiah Stewart, Rayshawn Benny. The list goes on. Kenneth Grant as well, another player, 6'3", 340. They got plenty of size. I got some nice physical specimens here on this side of the ball. It's going to be hard to run, Nick, but Ohio State, they have to be able to do it. They're going to be able to, at times, get 3 to 5 yards per carry to stay ahead of the sticks. And I also think that this Michigan defensive front, with their ability to blitz, with their stunts and their twists, they've had a lot of success all year long doing that. They send a variety of different blitzes. Jesse Minter's defense, they like to try and confuse you. Young quarterback here in McCord, he's got to be aware of what they're going to try to do to him. He's got to be, disciplined with his check downs, his hot routes. He's got to know where they're at all times, because these guys will send blitzes at you when it makes no sense at all, and they'll get home and they'll change this game.
Certainly have a very physical defensive line that can get after. They've looked great. The run defense is fantastic. They load up with the linemen. The linebackers are very physical as well. They have great run fillers who can make good tackles. I like what this unit can do. They're very solid so far this season. 9 points per game is a really fantastic average, 234 yards. They're just better in every regard than Ohio State is at the time, except for the pass yards, where they're literally just even. 90 yards per game given from the ground is a fantastic number. A lot of that relies on the front seven that we saw it against Penn State, where they got in the backfield and they absolutely crushed the run game and stuffed the run at points against Penn State. This is a very physical unit that is really solid. They are loaded with talent, and this is a big opportunity against a really talented offense. This is the best offense they're going to face so far this season. Michigan really hasn't played anyone that's tested them. This is a big test. Is this defense, all bark and no bite? Or do they have an opportunity here to shut down a very talented Ohio State offense?
Even with Maryland having success through the air, the Michigan pass rush was still able to really shake things up, and that includes, forcing a fumble for a touchdown early in that game. Derek Moore, another terrific player. Part of this 4-2-5, Junior Colson and Michael Barrett. Barrett did leave the game against Maryland. He should be back, though. He's been great in all facets, run defending, pass rushing. Certainly has been pretty reliable in coverage as well. Not as much as Colson. He's been very good in coverage. He's certainly going to look the matchup with Stover on occasion. But he's just been an elite tackler, great run defender his entire career. His physicality just speaks volumes. That's certainly something we've seen over the last couple of years. His ability to just fill lanes and run right at linemen and blow them up. So that's something that certainly is going to be notable for Ohio State to try and get past is Colson's physicality and ability to really shake up the game with his abilities. Overall, what do you think of this front six? Because they also run a 4-2-5, Nick. I love the pass rush. The defensive line is phenomenal. Ohio State's got to look for ways to crack this.
I absolutely love the pass rush. Like you said, the defensive line is phenomenal. They made Maryland uncomfortable in the pass game. They picked off Talia Tagovailoa twice. He threw for 247, but I think that's not an entirely reminiscent number of what happened. I think this is a very good defense against the pass, very good run defense as well. They made them uncomfortable, forced the fumble, like you said. This is a very physical unit. I'm a little concerned, right? They haven't played an offense quite like Ohio State. This is a very dominant offense who has the opportunity here to show their true skills against this Michigan defense. This is a very talented unit that plays the 4-2-5, physical, hard-hitting unit. You definitely got to like that if you're a Michigan fan.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's also kind of concerning, like we said with the tackles, that they finally played a good pass rush. Penn State exposed them. The secondary, this is one of the better passing attacks they'll face all year in Maryland. And these receivers are just flat out winning their matchups. Intermediate passing game was highly effective. They're able to get, a lot of stuff over the middle of the field, out towards the boundary as well. Josh Wallace, he struggled significantly. Will Johnson wasn't all that polished himself. Those two outside corners all year long have been very good, but this is a different challenge, Nick. You're giving up big plays to Maryland's receivers. Now you face Maserati Marv and his group of 5 stars. That's got to be very concerning if you're a Michigan fan. What do you make of these guys out wide? And, there's going to be a lot of open space. How can they fill it?
This is certainly tough when you look out wide. Like you said, you have keep saying this, there's incredibly talented wide receivers and offense as a whole for this Ohio State team. The secondary has some issues here. You got to be careful. You cannot let them beat you out wide. I think that's certainly something that they're going to try and draw up. McCord has been really good at picking apart secondaries over the middle. I think you got to be strong in the middle if you're Michigan. Make sure you cut down and just quick tackles. Make sure there's not a lot of yards after catch. Quick tackles if you're going to allow completions. Got to be careful of what coverage you're playing. This is a very tough ask for the secondary, who has not really played any offense that has been that talented through the air. Maryland, like I said, 247 through the air, but they did get 2 picks, so that's something positive. The turnovers, I would like to see Michigan force a turnover or 2 early in this game and get the crowd momentum on their side.
Yeah, Mike Sanders still their dynamic slot cornerback. He ended up hauling in those 2 interceptions. Makari Page, Rod Moore, they got some sound safeties as well. Might be some opportunities to expose them there, considering they haven't played as many snaps. I know the safety position's been kind of iffy for them in terms of, health. Quentin Johnston's played there a good bit. So I think there's going to be some opportunities to try and draw things up and try and get these guys open on post routes, and other things in the intermediate range to kind of expose them. Top to bottom, though, just a phenomenal Michigan defense. This is, where the rubber meets the road for the Wolverines, Nick. This is a big opportunity to prove that, the Maryland game wasn't a fluke, and all year long it hasn't been a fluke considering the opponent quality has been very low, but this is still a very talented defense, and that needs to be noted.
Certainly prime time here for Michigan. This is their best test. It's a big opportunity. If you get to the playoff, you're going to be facing pretty solid offenses. Alabama, Florida State. I know Florida State lost Jordan Travis. They're still a very solid offense. Oregon, Washington, Texas are all phenomenal offenses. If you're Michigan, you got to get through this first hurdle against Ohio State. Georgia, can't forget Georgia, fantastic offense as well. If you're Michigan, you have goals in the national championship. You got to get through this offense first. You got to shut down this offense and control the game.
Looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. This kind of seems unfair on paper. Quarterback and running back, I think that's certainly going to go to the Wolverines. Wide receiver, easily to the Buckeyes. I like the offensive line a little bit more, especially on the interior for Michigan. Defensive line's pretty even. Linebacking as well. I think Michigan, that's a bit of a clear edge for them. Secondary is even. I mean, this is top to bottom as best as it gets, Nick. These rosters are very comparable. I think you can make a case for the entire last 4 selections all being even, with Michigan's struggles at the tackle spot and some good playmakers in Ohio State's own right there in the middle of their defense. What do you think of this with the Buckeyes at the end of the day only getting 1 edge here?
It is interesting that the Buckeyes only get 1 edge. I'd be considering to potentially give the quarterback to Kyle McCord at this point, but overall, I think this is a very fair tale of tape. These teams are very even, but Michigan gets a slight edge, right? But I think this is an interesting matchup. Obviously, the one advantage, they do have wide receiver. That is a huge gap. So if you're an Ohio State fan, you can definitely take that and be proud of that. Very interesting tale of the tape between 2 very powerful teams in the Big Ten.
Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction. Keys to the game, for the Buckeyes, you got to stress this Michigan secondary. I remember watching last year going, man, there's just so much stress on your secondary playing these guys. Run game has to be stellar, especially on the interior. Staying with your defense. I think overall their run game's got to be good for them on that side, on both sides of the ball, really. For Michigan, the offensive tackles need to be sound in pass protection. Got to be a lot better than they've shown us the last 2 weeks. And don't allow big plays through the air. That one edge that Ohio State has at wide receiver. It's a massive edge, Nick. And I think as long as McCord, plays good football, Brian Hartline makes things a little bit easier for him here on the road. They're going to have no problem going through the air against Michigan's secondary, because I think they're going to be good in pass protection. I think the run defense, they're ready for prime time. I think they're going to step up, and then it's going to put Michigan in those long down and distances where those tackles will get exposed more often than not. 35-28 for me. Buckeyes going on the road, getting it done. Is there a world where Ryan Day loses 3 in a row?
I don't think there is a world where Ryan Day loses 3 in a row. And if he does, his seat is going to be very hot in Columbus. Those fans expect national championships. They expect to be contending for national championships year in, year out. The loss against Georgia in the playoff last year left a bad taste in their mouth, and they want to come back. 2 straight losses to Michigan left a bad taste in their mouth. This is a big opportunity for Ohio State to go out there and be like, hey, Michigan, be quiet. You guys aren't the victims. You cheated and all that nonsense. This Michigan victim role has been kind of annoying, if I have to be perfectly honest here. This game, it won't be a 1 versus 2. The college football playoff is going to take that away from us by making it probably a 2 versus 3 matchup, although Georgia has shown no indications to me they're not the number 1 team in the country with their dismantling of Tennessee this past weekend. I like this game a whole lot. It's an exciting game similar to the one in 06 with serious implications, similar to the game in 19 and 11 between LSU and Alabama. Just must-watch TV with huge national championship implications. I'm also going to take the Buckeyes. This is a very exciting matchup. In Ann Arbor, right, I would be thinking about taking Michigan, but there is a lot of off the field distractions, and I've been concerned with J.J. McCarthy throwing the ball. Did not look good against Maryland and didn't throw the ball at all in the second half against Penn State. So for that reason, I think that's a big advantage here. I like McCord to throw the ball and get some nice completions downfield to his incredibly talented wide receivers. I'm taking the Buckeyes in this one. This is a very exciting game. Must-watch TV for a college football fan. This is when it gets serious. These are the big matchups with big playoff implications, and none bigger than a game of the century-esque matchup in Ann Arbor this next weekend.
Be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me. Biggest game of the year. 22-0 is the combined records of these teams, just as we expected about 4 or 5 months ago, and we talked about it in the preseason.
Fantastic matchup. Cannot wait.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.
Is Iowa State winning, please?